Meeting including
Welcome.
This meeting is being recorded. Alert.
This is your Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 10 series finale, wrap up and review. To borrow the energy of Wheaton, spoiler alert! I'm calling for a spoiler alert! Red alert! Red alert! There's nipples in my shirt. Okay, so here we go. This is the review for the show, the finale. I'll give you my rating at the end, or you can watch the live reaction and watch at the end, or skip to the end, and you'll find my final words on it. But first, we'll start with let me tell you that The Last Generation is a little bit of a misleading title. It's appropriate for what they did, but it's a little misleading to us as an audience when we're initially watching it, thinking this is the wrap up to the Star Trek, TNG era of shows. Okay, so that's what it's sort of a lot of talk has been about that it's the wrap up to the TNG era of shows, which is actually not true. They could call it the wrap up potentially to TNG, but even then it's not necessarily. It's more of a baton passing is what I would say this episode is supposed to be. It's really a baton passing. We'll get into why. Okay, so let's just start with where things start out. So we start out with, and I'm going to go in the, specific segments, not segment by segment, going back and forth. I'm going to go through the storylines that occur within the episode. So we'll talk about, well, the A story will be what happens with the Enterprise D crew, and the B story will be what happens on board the Titan. Okay, so let's start with Enterprise, the Titan, the story B. And we'll save the best for last, if you want to call it that. Okay, so what occurs on the Titan is that they're in the fleet formation, being driven by the assimilated youth, Sydney and Alana, and not LeVar, Geordi's girls, and the other young Starfleet officers that have been assimilated. They're still connected to the fleet, and they're going towards Earth. Well, the older folks on the ship, including Seven, Rafi, and some others, including a guy who is a cook, they all have weapons, and they are going through the halls and taking out Borg as they go along, and they get to the turbo lift, and they go down, and they take back the bridge. But what they actually do, what actually results is that when they shoot at them with phasers, on stun or whatever, the Borgs actually beam out or transport out, and they end up in the transporter room of or I'm sorry, I'm taking it back. They are shot, and they're shooting their phasers, beams the Borg officers into the transporter area of the Titan. So they're basically containing them, kind of like there's episodes before where even in the TNG when the Ferengi took over the ship and Picard had been turned into a little kid, and they basically got it and transported them into the onto the transporter pad, and they put a force field up so they were stuck in there. That's essentially what they did to the younger Borg in this episode. So they kind of trapped them in the transporter room. While they and then they tried to take on ships from the fleet by using the cloaking device to to disconnect themselves from the directive from the main Borg ship. They used the cloaking device to kind of separate themselves and hide from the Borg. So they'd go in and out of the cloak feature on the Titan to try and avoid being caught, located, and controlled by the fleet formation feature. Eventually, the Borg that were in the transporter room were able to break through the force field, and they're able to stop the cloak from reacting. So they basically take the ship offline and leave them vulnerable to being destroyed as all of the ships from the fleet are heading towards space dock and are destroying space dock and almost destroying space. They actually destroy space dock, and then they fly past and they go and spread out across the world to all the large cities preparing to strike. So we'll leave it on that portion for story B. Story A has the Enterprise D going after trying to find the Borg, where this control beacon or whatever that's controlling all these ships is coming from, and they locate the Borg ship off the kind of hiding in the atmosphere of Jupiter. And so they go after that ship. And they get there and they discover that the ship is only at like 36% power normally, because it's using the majority of its power to direct this beacon to control all of the fleets near Earth at space dock. So they decide to do an away mission, which is, of course, has to happen with the D. And Picard and Riker. So one of the funnier line, the first line I remember laughing at this episode is Picard says, "I'm going over there," and then Riker says, "Well, you're not going alone." And then Worf says, "And I will make it a threesome." And Riker says, "Do you realize what you just said?" I guess Worf still has the ability to kind of bumble a little bit with some of his words. So the three of them knowingly go over to the Titan, knowing that they're probably not going to make it back. But the reason they're going over to the Titan is because they've got to locate Jack, and the beacon is on that ship. So they need to go over to the ship, destroy the beacon, and get Jack. That's the goal. So they get onto the ship, and they're at a point where Beverly is sort of monitoring Jack's brain waves from the Enterprise D, and she's kind of able to kind of focus the general area where he's at. So they know that he's on this one deck below, I think it was, for where they were at, and they had to go forward to where the beacon was. So basically, Picard says to Riker and to Worf that this is where we part. And I want you to know how much I've enjoyed how much I've enjoyed the time with you guys and how important you are to me. And basically they essentially say their goodbyes, with the idea, of course, that Picard probably is not going to make it out of this, because he's going to go and try and save Jack, and he's going to have to face off with whatever else that comes around. But I will say something I should back up and say is that when they get on the ship, what they discover is a lot of the Borg are not active. Okay, so there's a lot of chambers for the hive, and there's a lot of decomposing bodies in the hive. Like, it's skeletons that have no longer have flesh or anything, and that's just the machinery part, but they're inactive. So it's as though most of them are almost dead, basically, which is what the title comes from. So essentially what this is the last generation of the Borg, as you'll find out. So there's very few there's very few Borg trying to stop them in this process. They're going to the ship and not really encountering any Borg when they're initially there. So so then Picard goes off on his own way while Riker and Worf go looking for the beacon. So Picard finds the room that Jack showed up in the last episode, and he finds the figure standing on the platform, and it turns out to be Jack. And Jack is connected to all the wires, and basically he is transmitting orders to the Borg, and he's assimilated essentially into the Borg hive. And then, and then Picard sees what's left of the Borg Queen. It's only like part of her body, and she's kind of melded into the machinery of the ship, and she's basically still leading Jack and having him to basically take over and transmit and send all the orders to all the Borg. And so he is Picard is trying to destroy her, but not having any success because there's like a force field protecting her. And he starts ripping the wires that are attached to Jack out and trying to save him, and try to talk to him, but it's not working. So at one point he said, she says, that Jack, this is Jack's future or whatever, and that she knew that he would eventually come back. Locutus would return to the hive, basically. And Picard says, that he knew, he is coming back, but he's coming back for, there is something he needs to do with the hive. So he takes one of the wires and he jams it into his neck, and he basically rejoins the hive into the assimilation factor, and ends up encountering Jack sort of in this, I guess, in the Matrix sort of world within it. Not the same the animatrix that you saw in like Voyager, but they're communicating in sort of the I would just say the Matrix aspect of the Borg, and they're talking to each other, and essentially they come to the decision that Jack is talking about having a family, and this is and that he has a family here with the Borg or whatever else, and Picard tells him that he is his family and that he will not leave him, and that he will stay with him until the very end. So he's going to stay with Jack because Picard knows they're going to destroy the beacon and stop this whole thing. Meanwhile, Riker and Worf find the beacon, and they begin to be attacked by some Borg drones. On the Enterprise D, they're having trouble locking on their signals. The three-way mission people, Riker, Picard, and Worf, and connecting to Jack is obviously very hard as well. So they're not having any luck connecting to them. And then they discover that the beacon is at the heart of the Borg ship. So if they destroy the beacon, they destroy the ship. And so they can't wait much longer because the fleet is now spreading out across Earth to destroy the different cities, and they have to do something to stop it. So they make the decision. Data decides to manually drive the ship into the Borg ship because he believes he knows how to find the location of the beacon, and so he drives the ship in, and they find it, and they're going to destroy it. And basically Riker and Worf know that they will also die with Picard and Jack, because once they destroy the beacon, it'll destroy the whole ship. So they prepare to do it. Meanwhile, when he says he'll stay with them, that he's his family, Picard tells Jack, you're my family and you're my son and yada yada yada, and I'll stay with you and I won't leave you. Jack essentially wakes up from this idea that the Borg are his family because it's, he has a connection with them, and he begins to tear the wires out of him and then finally remove the wire from Picard, and the Borg Queen says, "You'll be alone," and he says, "No, I won't. I'm not going to be alone." And he gets Picard, and so they attempt to make an escape. Well, Riker and Worf are nearby, and so they're trying to leave as the ship, because the Enterprise D finally has to fire on the beacon, and they fire on the beacon, and the ship starts to be destroyed. And just at the end, they're able to, get the four of them off, and they, fly off in the Enterprise D as the Borg ship is destroyed. And essentially, it's the end of the Borg. So that's what the Last Generation thing is. It's the end of the Borg. Because, well, what you find out during this conversation with Picard and the Queen is that essentially when Picard, what Picard and the TNG crew did when they interacted with the Borg is essentially they destroyed that cohesiveness to the Borg. And as a result of it, they started thinking for themselves. They went their own ways. They fell into disarray. They were no longer of a single mind anymore. And so eventually the race, if you want to call it, the race that was the Borg, which is a bunch of assimilated life forms, began to die off. And so they were at the last of the Borg, basically. The whole idea of putting that genetic code in the transporters was to bring the next level of evolution of the Borg. But they had to do it through the control and the beacon controlling them. They were no longer able to be physically be a part of the hive. They were essentially mentally controlled by the hive, by this beacon or whatever. So the Borg ship is destroyed and they fly away. And you see that on the Titan, that the crew, the assimilated Borg, break into the bridge and aim guns at Seven and Raffi and Raffi on the bridge, and the other people who went with them. And then when the ship is destroyed, it causes the genetic code that kind of came to life in them to dissipate, and it goes back down, and they are reconverted back to their normal form. And so they all drop guns and don't do anything to each other. And they all go. So it goes back now, and you hear like a captain's log from Riker saying, "This is captain's log, Stardate." Well, I guess this is Stardate 1, the beginning of a new era for us, because obviously they're going to rebuild and and start over again, because they have to kind of rebuild Starfleet and everything, because they lost so many people and everything like that. Fortunately, the Earth wasn't destroyed, but Starfleet itself has to rebuild. And so they're calling this day 1. So you find out that Crusher became an admiral, an admiral, and she is involved with, she worked on medicine in the medicine area, the medical field, and she found a way to withdraw the genetic code or any other potential, abnormality out of people who were in the transporter. So in other words, she could detect changelings. She learned how to stop them from letting changelings getting in. She learned how to remove that genetic code from the Borg so they could never be reactivated. And so essentially setting them to where they were, free from those curses, basically, or from the potential tampering by the changelings. Let's see what else was happening next. Then you have an episode where Seven is talking. Oh, and they talk about how the changelings had not destroyed everybody that they had taken over, that they had just kind of held them hostage, and among them was Tuvok. So Tuvok, who is, a leader now, is actually now talking to Seven at one point and talking about how, the Enterprise crew, Riker and everybody else, how they were pardoned because even though they violated orders, they ended up saving everything. So they were pardoned. And then he's talking about what Seven did aboard her ship, and how it was out of the line of, it was out of line, and she wasn't following protocols, following captain's orders during any of it. Not just the part at the end, but just she was kind of working against Shaw. And she says, I know, I don't belong in Starfleet, which is why I am going to resign from Starfleet. Sorry, I have to get this thing to stop. Someone's trying to call me in for so that's why she's resigning from Starfleet. And so she's running from Starfleet, and then Tuvok says, slides a metal disc over, which is like a little video. I guess it's like, I don't know, like a disc or something that contains a log from Shaw. And Shaw is making recommendations regarding the crew, and his recommendation at the end is he's talking about working with Seven and saying, that she's kind of a wild card, and that she doesn't always follow protocol, but that she is that she's very smart, basically, and as a result of it, she had good instincts. And he's saying that I recommend that when we get back to Earth, that she be promoted to captain. And so basically, Tuvok tells her that her resignation is denied, captain, so that she's going to become a captain, probably of a ship in the new frontier, if you want to call it, of things. So Rafi and Worf sort of say, they kind of compliment each other and say thank you to each other, and for what they had meant for each other. And then you see it jump forward a year, and there's a shuttlecraft with Picard, Crusher, and Jack going towards going towards space dock. And you find out that Jack seems nervous because he's about to start working on a ship. He's going to take his first position working on a ship in Starfleet. They accelerated his development of his training, and he's now able to work on a ship. So they arrive at dock, and they're talking about and they pull into a shuttle bay, and they find the Titan, and they say that, well, it's not the Titan anymore. Basically, they say, that it's a new day, and that they're going to acknowledge the crew of the Enterprise and what they have done to make the world better. And so essentially, since they use the Titan during this season as their Enterprise, they fly up over the top of the ship, and they see that on the top of the ship, it now says, instead of being the Titan, now it's the Enterprise G. NCC 1701G, the Starship Enterprise. So that's the new Enterprise. You find out that Seven is captain of the new Enterprise, that Raffi is first officer, and Sydney is at the comm and things like that, and Jack is going to be, he's an ensign working on the Enterprise. So he gets on. He's like, "Where do you want me? Do you want me at comm? Do you want me in the science department? Where do you want me working?" And they say, "You'll work right here. You'll sit right here." And he's going to sit in one of the command seats as special counsel to the captain. So it's Seven at center, Raffi at her side, and then Jack to her left. So that's the new crew, and then they're about to take out, so they're like they're about to take off from space dock, and so Jack says make it give your first command as captain, and she basically smiles. She never says it, but it's like she's about to say engage, basically, to start her chapter of history in the books. Then you jump to 10 forward. Well, actually, you did see an episode, not an episode, you did see a scene where they were, LaForge, Riker, and Picard were on board the Enterprise D in the salvage yard. And they kind of are taking a last look at the bridge and talking about how the ship really had served them so well and saved them so many times. And that was one scene. But then they're all at 10 forward. The seven main are all at 10 forward, and they're drinking wine and kind of getting drunk and telling stories. And Picard makes this a very sort of poetic, almost English poetry style toast to everybody, data included and such like that. And at the end, they all play cards, and they're all sitting around playing poker together, and it ends with him dealing cards, kind of like at the end of All Good Things, where he's dealing out the cards to everybody around the table, and that's sort of the end. And then there's a credit sequence, and then you get the scene at the end, which is kind of that add-on, right after the after credits scene, and you see Jack in his quarters, and he is doing his unpacking, and suddenly behind him Q shows up, and he turns to him and he's talking for a second. He said, you're Q, and he goes, yeah, and he goes, I thought my father said that you were, that you had died. And Q says, you all, you humans think so linearly. And he says, and Q is decked out in the same robe he was wearing in the first season of TNG, and at the end, and in the All Good Things, he's wearing that robe, and he's and he's saying, he said he's wearing that kind of judge's uniform, and Jack says, I thought that my father finished this trial you were holding against humanity, and Q says, yes, his trial is over, but yours is just beginning. And so now the idea is that he's going to basically follow Crusher, Jack Picard, Crusher, what do you want to call him, and his adventures, and test him. So it's really like passing the baton to it's the last generation of, I guess, really the Borg, because they were essentially eliminated now completely. And it's the last, kind of chapter supposedly of the TNG crew. So that's kind of the wrap up. Let me just give you my opinion of it. There were parts of it that were interesting, but I felt like, and I kind of said this in reaction, I felt like there was nothing lost, and so there was nothing gained. I don't feel like them all I feel like it would have been fine if they had let Worf and Riker and Picard and Jack, or at the very least, Picard and Jack, or at least the very least Picard, if they had let them be eliminated and killed off. I think that would have been more appropriate, and it would have been that there would have been something lost in the effort to try and save things. But the fact that nobody in the main characters died, I feel like we lost something. So we really didn't gain anything. I felt like it was like they couldn't lose no matter what they did. There was never any potential that at this huge, massive thing that could destroy the everything, there was only one death of character that we were slightly connected to, and that was Shaw. If they had killed off one of the main crew, I felt like there would have been an investment to us so that the benefit of winning would have come at a price, and we would have felt like, okay, well, Riker's gone or Worf is gone, but at least they saved it. But this, it's almost like, well, they couldn't lose. It's like they were just touching gold all the time. It's like every card was, every hand was blackjack. And I felt like that was kind of cheap. I felt like that devalued it. Um, there were some things where Data just had the instincts he could drive to where the beacon was. Beverly somehow could track Jack's brain waves. I mean, it just seems like every time they needed something to work, it worked. Instead of it being a challenge, it was like, and even though they were in a challenging situation, it just seemed like every time they had a challenge, they just overcame it too easily. When Picard is there and talking to Jack, and he's saying, "I'll stay with you till the end," and all that jazz, then Jack is suddenly going, "I'm not alone anymore," and I'm no longer an abandoned child or whatever. And he's like ripping off things and telling the Borg that he doesn't need them anymore because he's got Daddy. And there was nothing. There was no payment for the victory. And when you get a victory without any kind of payment to it, especially for us as the audience. Now, yes, there may have been payments where characters were killed off within the storyline, but even the changeling stuff, none of the characters they had kidnapped died. I mean, Tuvok didn't really die. Any of those other people. Now, there were characters who did die because they did destroy some of the people, but those weren't characters we ever saw, right? So as a result of it, maybe Shelby, but we didn't really have a lot invested in her. But any of the characters that we really have attachments to, none of them died. So there was really no payment for them to survive all. It's just like, well, we've come up against this and we kicked their ass before, we'll kick their ass again. And there was no collateral damage, which I feel like there should have been collateral damage to make it feel like it was more worth it. I don't like the end where they all are just sitting around playing cards. I feel like they just ripped off the end of All Good Things. Honestly, I said this in the end of the live reaction video, but if you have seen TNG all the way through, and you're watching this, spoiler video of Star Trek Picard season 3, episode 10, The Last Generation, but you have not seen any of the other episodes of Picard from season 1 up to season 3 and through season 3, episode 9. If you haven't seen any of them, you're just watching this. Don't watch the rest of the series. Just let it end with TNG and imagine what you want to happens afterwards. Because Jack is not significant, except to this in this last scene that I was talking about earlier. He's not really significant. Nothing. All it does is give Picard a son all of a sudden, and he says, "I was missing you, were what I was missing my whole life." But I mean, there was so many other ways they could have done that. I mean, he didn't. It kind of goes back to that old Stone song. You don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. So yeah, he didn't have a son necessarily, but he had a family, and they were in ways like his children. Like Data was kind of like his child because he guided and supported Data. You know what I mean? Riker was like his brother. Worf was like a brother. Geordi and Data, like I said, were both kind of like like children because he was guiding them. They were like younger children. They were guiding them because they were so young in the process. So he really had that family. I don't think Jack really added much to the universe for the character of Picard. And at the end, they're just all sitting around playing cards, just like the same they were at the end, and just they're laughing and singing and all this jazz. And I don't know how that added more um to the canon or the storyline of Star Trek. Um, the only thing I did think was interesting, even though it's kind of a ripoff, and just a suggestion that they could do a series, is I did like the appearance of Q. I thought it was kind of interesting they decided to bring him back. I think it was also a little bit of a I think it was also a little bit of a cheat. I don't like the idea that they played all this thing where like, oh well, Q's gone and he has this emotional goodbye scene with Picard in the end of season 2 because it's supposed to be the end of Q, and then they bring him back. So they kind of, got rid of him to not really get rid of him. I kind of felt like they just should have, let that story wrap up with Q, and then they had to bring it back and have him basically say we're going to go through the same test with you, but they've already gone through all this. Why do we need to see another series where he's tested? What's going to be different from him versus Picard? Because I mean, it's just like doing a remake. It just isn't necessary. So while there was some good things in it, I think the show was I think it was fairly mediocre. I give it a 6 out of 10. I said that even in the live reaction. I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. I'm going to give it a 6, but mostly it's nostalgia. If I really thought about it, because I feel like there were so many cliches, I'd probably put this at like a 3 or 4. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put this at a 4 now. The nostalgia had a benefit. There was a couple of little things that were interesting, but I don't even call this a mediocre because I just felt like there was no collateral damage. And so my investment, I didn't have to pay something for my benefit because I got what I wanted. I hit the lottery, I hit blackjack every time and didn't have to worry about anything going wrong. My money was always good. My money was I was always rolling the table. I never had any chance that I was going to lose a hand, or I never lost a hand. So I just didn't feel like it was a benefit. So I give it a 4 out of 10. That would be my final number for this. I just, if you've seen Star Trek Next Generation and you have not watched anything of Picard except for this video, then I highly recommend you don't watch the rest of the series. Let it end at TNG and just, imagine for yourself what you think happened to them afterwards. The best line at the end of Star Trek TNG, when he's dealing out the cards, it says, "Nothing's wild and sky's the limit." So they could do anything. So whatever you imagine happened to them is what happened to them. I don't think they needed this. That's my review of Picard season 3, episode 10. If you like this video or you have different opinions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you like it, tap the thumb button, the thumb button, the like button, or punch it in the face, or massage it gently. Just love it, stroke it, and let me know what you think. Even if you disagree and think I'm totally wrong, that's fine. But what would you rate this on a scale of 1 to 10? I give it a 4. All right, that's it. That's it for this, and that's it for Star Trek Picard. Probably thank God, because it needed to, it needed to go. And I will see you in the next video. Be well.